What's new in traditional religions? What's different about non-traditional religions? What do many religious spiritual teachings have in common today? Which are cutting edge and why? What are the new visions? Hi, I'm June Knight. Welcome again to New Visions. I'm so pleased to have on our program a world-renowned and much-loved and respected theologian, John Cobb. He is an emeritus professor of the Claremont School of Theology and the Claremont Graduate School in Claremont, California. Also, he's co-director of the Center for Process Studies in Claremont and co-founder of the Mobilization of the Human Family. He was born in Japan, the son of Methodist missionaries. He's received his PhD degree from the University of Chicago Divinity School, and he taught at the Claremont School of Theology for 32 years. During his career, he's received many honors, including a fellowship from the Woodrow Wilson International Center of Scholars, the Alumnus of the Year Award from Chicago Divinity School, and honorary doctorates from the University of Victoria and the University of Mainz. He's written many articles, edited a wide variety of books, and has written over 25 books. Some of them are God in the World, Is It Too Late? A Theology of Ecology, Doubting Thomas, Matters of Life and Death, and Becoming a Thinking Christian. And I'm just so very pleased to have John Cobb back with us. And we're going to talk about one of his books that's a more recent one, that's entitled The Earthiest Challenge to Economism and a Theological Critique of the World Bank. Thanks again for being with us.
Glad to be here.
This is a fascinating book, and fascinating topic. Very eager to hear your thoughts about this. In looking at the book, I know you kind of divide things into what you call 3 epochs.
Yes.
Why don't we start there? Because that's one of the
Okay.
main themes of the book.
Yes. Well, as a theologian, I'm very interested in what people in various periods take as that which is most worthy of their devotion and commitment, in a sense, their God or their religious faith. And in the West, and these 3 epochs are characterizing the history of Western Europe and then the North Atlantic world. In the West, there was a long epoch in which Christianity was what people most identified themselves with and what they were most willing to give their lives for. This was a form of what Christians call idolatry. That is, it was Christianity or the church rather than truly God around which society was largely organized. Of course, they would claim the authority of God for what they were doing, but often not very convincingly. So I call that the epoch of Christianism. And the devotion that Christians had led to terrible consequences, especially when Christianity was split. So
Kind of wars between
different Christian groups. And in the first half of the 17th century, these wars came to a horrible climax. The 30 Years' War in Germany devastated much of the land, and there were wars in England and in France. And more Christians said, we can't approve of killing one another for the sake of the gospel. That's not what the gospel is about.
Not so Christ-like, is it?
Not very Christ-like. And this came to expression in the Treaty of Westphalia in 1648, so right about the middle of the 17th century. And they decided that they would let the prince or the ruler, political ruler, not now the religious head, but the political head, decide what the religion of a particular area would be. Well, that symbolizes, and more than symbolizes, really embodies a deep shift from the time of Christianism to the epoch of nationalism. And from the middle of the 17th century till the middle of the 20th century, nations were what people cared most about. People identified themselves as French or Germans, Prussians, I should say, or Austrians. German came a little bit later because Germany was not united. And people in large numbers fought for their countries
And they kind of had national religions, didn't they?
The nation became itself the religious object. So it might be two Catholic countries fighting each other. It might be two Protestant countries. Might be a Protestant and a Catholic. It didn't make a lot of difference. It was the nation that was the object of devotion. And that came to an extreme head in the 20th century in two wars that began in Europe between chiefly France and Germany, the great power rivals on the European continent, but spread all over the world, so we call them world wars. And in the second of those wars, we have Nazism and fascism embodying nationalism in an extreme way. You see, nationalism is not just one state against another state, it also is one ethnic group against any other ethnic group that may be living in the same geographical area. So the Holocaust was an expression of nationalism. At the end of that war, it wasn't possible. People were just not willing to reorganize Europe on nationalistic grounds. So they reorganized Europe as the European Economic Community. And it was assumed that the common interest of people is prosperity.
Money.
So we will subordinate national loyalties to whatever it takes to bring prosperity to everybody. And it did a lot of good for Europe. I think Europe is no longer a threat to the world. That is, France and Germany are not going to draw the world into another terrible war the way they did. And there's not in Western Europe the kind of nationalism that so long led to persecution of Jews. Earlier, Jews were persecuted because of their religion. Then for 200 years, 300 years, 300 years, 1650 to 1950, they were persecuted because of their ethnic differences. And there's not nearly as much danger of that now. So
in an economism.
In an economism. So economism has its real advantages. I'm going to attack it in a moment, but I'm trying to give it its due. It's another form of idolatry.
So we went, just to kind of recap here, we went from Christianism to nationalism to economism.
To economism, that's right.
All right.
And of course, just as there were residues of Christianism during the nationalist period, so there are residues of nationalism during the economist period. But today, if a presidential candidate functions in ways that would have seemed very common sense 60 or 70 years ago, he's just written out. Pat Buchanan is a nationalist. And most of the press just treats that as being ridiculous. Because the important thing is that we organize the world for the sake of free trade and greater economic growth. And the kinds of things Pat Buchanan wants work against that. I'm just using that to illustrate how far we have come. And
so money is the...
Money is God.
Money is the God.
Money is our God. Yes, that's right.
Money is the God now.
Yeah.
So, okay.
Now the book is called The Earthiest Challenge to Economism, because one of the consequences of making money God is that the natural world is very rapidly exploited and abused. And there are more and more people who look at what's happening to the earth. And that, of course, includes all of its inhabitants. I don't mean just the soil or something like that. And they are appalled and very frightened. And as long as almighty dollar reigns, there's not much we can do to protect the earth from further exploitation and depredation.
So you call an earthist?
Earthism, I'm suggesting, is a new
It's
ism.
like the fourth almost.
That's right. But it's not in control. I mean, the others we're talking about, isms that came to power.
Okay.
Whether earthism will ever be whether it will in fact be the successor to economism, I don't know, but it seems to be the only force, spiritual force in the world today that can effectively challenge the dominance of economism.
Tell us a little bit more about earthism. Define it.
Well, people who believe that more important than wealthy people getting richer, is the preservation and restoration of the earth and its creatures, and the ending of the process of wiping out so many species, taking care of the oceans so that they can once again produce the healthy marine life that has been there in the past. We want to stop the process of global warming so that we won't so disrupt these processes. They are putting the earth as the center of their concern. Their goal is a healthy, vital, sustainable planet. And whatever, of course, we need an economy in order to do that. But the economy should serve the well-being of the earth and its inhabitants rather than be an end in itself that then may incidentally destroy the earth and its inhabitants.
Well, wouldn't you think, though, that there may be no choice in the future, that Earthism is going to have to become the God, as you say, rather than money, just if we want to continue to exist?
But there are many people who think, who are more concerned about getting their piece of the pie now than they are about whether human life flourishes in the future. And of course, some of them have theories that assure them that if we will pursue the economistic policies strongly enough, everything will be all right.
Okay. So
many of them deny that economism is a threat. I think that's what we just saw recently in Seattle. The leaders believe that economism is truth and the supreme reality, and if we will simply promote free trade and expand the economic activity of the planet, that somehow the other problems will take care of themselves.
Everything will be okay.
And the protesters think that that's a recipe for disaster.
Because no one would just come out and say they don't care about the future.
No.
I mean, they wouldn't dare say that.
A few people will. A few people will say they do care, they do see that the present policies can't go on forever, but that there's nothing we can do about it. So in the meantime, let's
live now and
get the most out of it for ourselves.
And don't worry about the future.
So there are some people who will talk that way.
Who will openly admit that.
Yes.
Your book is a theological critique of the World Bank.
Yes. I selected the World Bank because it was founded at the same time as the International Monetary Fund. And during those days, there was an effort to establish something like the World Trade Organization. It took a long time for that to happen, but there were repeated trade talks. And so the three really belonged together as the Bretton Woods institutions. And they were the first international economistic institutions. And of the three, well, first I should say, the World Trade Organization was simply to promote trade. And the International Monetary Fund is really also to promote trade, to promote the free flowing of currencies around the world and so forth. But the World Bank had as its policy helping the poor to overcome their poverty. So it was established with idealistic motives with which I have great sympathy and appreciation. So then it's particularly interesting to see if you have an institution that is economistic in the sense that it's committed to the basic principles of expanding the economy and promoting economic growth and so forth, but also is committed to overcoming some of the most serious human problems.
Helping people.
Helping people in the process, and in later years preserving the environment and so forth. How do these things work out in relation to each other? So I found it very interesting to study the World Bank, and generally I came to the conclusion that there's a deep tension, that the World Bank has been wisely, well influenced by its actual experience. Whereas at one time, the leaders of the World Bank may have thought, all we have to do to overcome poverty is simply speed up the growth of the economy as a whole. Under McNamara, that policy was abandoned, And they said, I shouldn't say abandoned, it was recognized that that by itself did not relieve poverty. The growth all goes to the rich. The poor are not benefited. So he directed major resources directly to trying to deal with poverty. Not too successfully, but with some successes. In the earlier days, the argument was that if we just get prosperous enough, the environment will take care of itself. And the World Bank no longer supports that kind of a view. They have many, many programs and policies directed specifically to preserving the environment. And in many ways, they have learned that economic growth doesn't solve the problem. But their present position is, although it doesn't solve any problems by itself, no problems can be solved without it. And for that reason, their major influence in the world is still on the side of promoting economic growth. And in order to do that, they have contributed greatly to freeing up transnational corporations to invest in third world countries. With respect to their own projects, they are very, very careful that the project is structured so as to benefit the poor and avoid destroying the environment. But when they free things up for the transnational corporations to move in, what the transnational corporations do doesn't help the poor and is destructive of the environment. So there's this duality, the kind of paradox that the wiser they become, the less their own decisions have any effect on the outcome, and they have contributed to the situation which makes their own wisdom irrelevant to the outcome.
How do they respond to this? I mean, how would they defend themselves?
Well, I think the theory that I propounded, this is James Wolfensohn, who is the president of the World Bank, is a truly great man. I have nothing but personal admiration. And he is the one from whom I was quoting when I said he knows that just having policies to support economic growth will not take care of the problem of the poor or the problem of women or the problem of health, or you just go down the list of all these things. So he has developed specific programs to deal with all of these issues. And many of them do a lot of good. I admire and appreciate it. He is still either personally convinced or by virtue of his position must say, I don't know which it is, that nevertheless none of this will solve the problem without economic growth, and that therefore the World Bank must support those policies that open up third world countries to the free movement of first world capital. So that's his position at present, and I think it's too bad, but frankly, if he came out where I am, I expect he wouldn't have the job the next day. So,
where are you?
Oh, I think.
What would you, if you had a job, what would you do?
Well, I couldn't do it if I had that job. But what I think we need to simply make a fundamental shift and recognize the purpose of the economy should be for the sake of human beings, and especially the poor, and for the sake of the earth and all the species that are being destroyed, and
those should be the top
for the
priorities.
sake of the future. And therefore, we need to rethink what we want the economy to do.
Okay.
And then that would mean not making it freer and freer from all controls, but would bring other considerations to bear and then limit what the economic actors could do within that scope. So it would be a fundamental reversal. You see, we have been transferring power from the political sphere to the economic sphere for 50 years. And now national governments, well, the national governments of third world countries are almost powerless. They have to take those actions that will attract capital. And these may be very hard on their poor, and it may mean letting all their forests be cut down or whatever. They just have no choice any longer. They are not the decision makers. But obviously, first world governments still have some power. At Seattle recently, the protesters, the major protesters were probably from labor and environmental groups. The ones that got somewhere were the labor groups, because it's obviously very important to the Democrats not to completely alienate
labor.
Alienate labor, and Clinton may have seriously tried to introduce considerations of labor into the continuing trade talks that the World Trade Organization sponsors. He was unsuccessful. And obviously he hasn't been working at it over the years. In other words, he's somewhat like Jim Wolfensohn, I think, in that he really does care about these things, but he's convinced that the most important thing is to keep heating up the global economy. But environmentalists point out that the level of economy we now have is unsustainable. That is, if you just stop growing right now, you would not be able indefinitely to continue to exploit the earth the way we are now doing. If you speed up the economy, you shorten the time before catastrophe. That voice I don't think was heard at all. At least I didn't get any sense Clinton had picked up on that.
As a theologian yourself, what do you think the answer is? I mean, is it a total reworking of our value system?
Our value system is very mixed, and most people today, if you ask them about their values, will not put making money first. Some will, but more of them are concerned about their family relationships and other things than they are. I mean, money comes in there very soon. I don't mean to minimize it.
Well, you have to have it.
You have to have it. Most of us don't really have to have as much
as we do.
As we do, or certainly not as much as we want to have or think we have. But there is no structure which enables us collectively to act on the values we even have at the present time. So that the one shared value, it seems, is making money. So we've reorganized our school system, and it's very explicit. The purpose of our public schools is to prepare people for the labor market.
To make money.
To make money. The purpose of our universities is to prepare people for higher level occupations within the market. Nobody would have said that in the early part of the 20th century. So we have to at least recover some of the values that have been subordinated and give them priority, and then develop political and economic structures that would express that reversal.
Do you see any hope in the increased interest in meaningfulness to one's life and spirituality, which there is definitely an increased interest in that, if not organized religion, certainly spirituality?
Well, it's yes and no, and it just depends. For some people, the interest in spirituality is a kind of escape. They know that the public world is going where it's going. It doesn't deal with their inner needs, and so they develop a spirituality that will enable them to cope with this without any sense that it would make that they have a responsibility toward that public world. That kind of spirituality, I mean, if it's required in order to maintain sanity, I'm not against it. I'm just saying it's not the kind that gives me hope.
It's not going to help the world.
It's not going to help the world. Okay. And the situation will simply be worse, so people will have more and more desperate needs for something to deal with internally. But there are many other people for whom spirituality has a much wider meaning than that. And the problem with the people who say they're spiritual but not religious is that it tends to be very individualistic. And I'm a believer in institutions and communities and structures if you really want to make a difference. But of course, out of all this individualistic spirituality that has much to commend it, there may emerge some new structures and patterns that may be far more effective than the old-line religious institutions. So I think there's hope in that direction.
I've heard some religious leaders talk about planetary citizenship.
Yes. That, again, can be positive or negative. For often what you hear is economics and technology have unified the planet, and then we just take that as a given and then say, given that, we need to recognize that we are not any longer citizens of nations, but we are citizens of the whole planet. That means we're really co-opted into the global capitalist system, or it can mean that. There are others who mean quite the opposite, that we need to be concerned about the whole planet. And that means not just the moneyed interests that run the show, but we need to be sensitive to what's happening to the plants and animals, the fourth world peoples, that is the indigenous peoples, the poor. And as planetary citizens, we need to work toward giving the planet a chance to survive into the future in a healthy way. So almost all these labels and movements can go either way on what I take to be the most important issues.
We have like a minute left. Tell us what to do. What should we do as individuals to make a difference?
Well, I think the first thing is to lift up the fundamental issues in our own minds as clearly as possible. And if we do that, not everybody will agree with me, of course. But I think that the media and the educational system don't encourage us to ask these questions. And until we ask them and then answer them, we don't have a pair of glasses on which enables us to look at what's going on in the world in a realistic sense. So if everybody whose values I think would be more congenial to Earthism than to Economism understood what was happening, we could at least generate a political debate, not this time, but maybe 4 years from now, among presidential candidates about what their vision really is. At present, nobody has a chance for the presidency who doesn't have the okay of Wall Street, which means the okay of support of the global capitalist system. It would take a massive change in public opinion to make it possible for someone to run against that system.
So basically we should become more educated, more informed, and then speak our opinion whenever we can.
Speak our opinion,
and vote that way.
But encourage other people to think about it, because it's not as much a matter of pushing one opinion on other people. It's just raising a set of issues that are almost systematically silenced at the present time.
And discussion.
Yeah.
Well, I'm sorry we're out of time, but it was just been wonderful having you with us. I just so appreciate your being here, and you must come back again.
Thank you.
And we hope you'll come back again, too. Thanks again for being with us. This program is dedicated to you who are sincerely seeking the truth, because the truth really does make you free.